Hi and welcome to the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast for athletes, coaches and professionals who want to achieve their goals faster. I'm David Charlton and I'll be sharing proven methods from leading athletes, coaches and experts that will help you get the most from your talent. Today's show is sponsored by Functional Intelligent Training, who are a sports injury clinic located in Gosforth near Newcastle upon Tyne and specialise in athlete development, nurturing future champions, strength and conditioning support and excellent rehabilitation services. Life, sport or our careers are not straightforward. There's no linear path that you can carve out, as regularly we're faced with challenges, with setbacks. In mental toughness, it's all about how we deal with these times, whether we choose to move forward positively, simply survive, drown, or quit. And today, I'm joined with Kate Mackay, a successful author who's going to go on to share some fascinating insights into learning how to snowboard when you end up on your backside many times. So when Kate got into snowboarding, she was in her 30s, she was a new mum. She faced quite a few difficulties along the way, and she's going to talk about how she got through them, how she faced those difficulties head on. Could you tell me a little bit about your journey into snowboarding and how you went about learning?
Yeah, sure. You probably won't be surprised to know it was because of my boyfriend, who's now my husband. He'd asked me to come away snowboarding with him when we first started going out. And I didn't really know a lot about snowboarding. I'd been on a school ski trip sort of when I was about 13 away to Austria, and I'd absolutely hated it. I couldn't do it. My ski tips would cross. I had like poles that there was too much to think about and I just couldn't do it. And I hated it so much that I vowed I would never go back on the snow. And I didn't for 20 years. So I was in my early 30s and although I didn't know much about snowboarding, I did know it wasn't skiing. I knew it was just one plank of wood, no poles. So I thought, how hard can it be? I'll give it a go. So that was sort of how I started. And back in the day then, so that was 2001. So that was sort of January time 2001. And we went to Tignes in France. So high resort, snowshore, and I'd had lessons. But knowing what I know now, the lessons were pretty rubbish. And back in the day then, there weren't the dedicated snowboard schools around like there are now. So there was still a lot of the way people were taught was very different. So a lot of the time that I was taught then, I felt like I didn't progress very much. I found it really hard. It wasn't easy to do. There was many a time where I was frustrated. I got angry, cross myself. And I suppose it was much more challenging than I expected it to be. However, there were glimmers of how much fun it could be as well. So there were times, like there was the odd bit of time where I'd get up a bit of speed, or I could actually do something. I could turn, and I didn't know how I did it, but it was like, wow, that was amazing. I love that. I want more of that. But then it would go back to being frustrated and I couldn't do it and I didn't know how I'd done it. So although that was a very difficult week away, I'd seen glimmers of how much fun it could be. And I had decided, despite everything, that I wanted to pursue it. But life sort of got in the way. And I didn't really get back on a snowboard properly for quite a long time. And after I had my daughter, you realise, I suppose, when you have kids, time is precious. You know, I hadn't got time if I really wanted to nail this, I hadn't got time to faff about anymore. So I decided I wanted to go on a course and learn properly. You know, my boyfriend was then my husband, but having him to teach me was not a good idea. I won't even begin to tell you about the rows that we had. So I thought I needed a professional to teach me. So at the time, my husband had been on a heliboarding trip out in Russia, and he'd got loads of information from different companies. And one of the companies that he'd had information from was McNab Snowboarding, and that's run by Neil McNab. They were based in Chamonix, and the way that the brochure was, I knew that he taught with a quite a specified method. And I knew from my horse riding that I'm quite cerebral in the way that I learn. I'm quite theoretical, and I need to understand why I do something. So I thought, right, okay, he looked like the one for me. I didn't know at the time, but Neil was an 11-time British snowboard champion. He was a high mountain guide, and he was instrumental in setting up the BASI, the British Association of Snowboard Instructors teaching qualification. So he was highly qualified in what he did. So I decided, right, that was the person for me. That's where I was going to go. Didn't really know that Chamonix had this fearsome reputation for extreme sports, summer and winter. And when I arrived, I found out I was the only woman. There were 10 men and me. So I had a real panic the first night before I'd even got on the snow, thinking, oh my God, how am I going to cope here? But cope I did. It was hard, physically and mentally. And when this first trip away, my daughter was 21 months. So she was just progressing from going from a cot to a bed. And I was aware that I was obviously leaving my husband with her, and she was displaying some challenging behaviour, getting out of bed all the time. So he would often ring me in the evening while I was out on the course, complaining about, she wasn't sleeping, he was shattered, he wasn't getting his tea till late, and I knew that he just probably wanted to let off a bit of steam. But while we were out there one day, so we'd had Keith McIntosh, who was sort of Neil's right-hand man, teaching us. But this particular day, we were going to get Neil to teach us. So we were all quite excited. And we'd had loads of snow, got up in the morning, bluebird day, cobalt blue skies, first sort of on the first cable car up the mountain. It was quite a small cable car. So while we're in the cable car, my phone goes, and it's Gordon, my husband, and I just knew, and I answered the phone, and I was aware that there's all these men around me half listening to my conversation, and he was sort of complaining again, and I had to ask the question, do you want me to come home? And I'd got everything crossed that, no, please don't say he needs me to come home. Unfortunately, I didn't have to come home. He said, no, I just need to let off a bit of steam. I'm fine. You stay, you learn, and do what you need to do. And it was probably then that I really realised, when the push came to shove, that I really, despite the fact that it was hard mentally and physically, that I really wanted to do this. So
you talk there about it being hard mentally. It sounds like really, really hard in all honesty. What were you experiencing? What were you going through there?
For me, it was about mentally learning a new skill, but the skill was a physical skill. So it was trying to translate what I was hearing verbally into doing something practically in an environment that I wasn't familiar with at all, but I knew the environment could change. So the snow conditions would change, under your board the conditions would change, the weather could change. Obviously I was with an instructor, I wasn't left on my own. So you're getting lots and lots of inputs mentally from the surrounding environment, the people you're with, and the conditions under your feet, as well as trying to learn all these new things. So you're getting constantly bombarded. And middle of the week of this time that I was away, I actually didn't feel very well. And I think it was just, I was so tired, and I had a day off. I had that day off and felt a lot better. I'm just aware that there was a lot to take in. And on the last day of the course, I was probably mentally and physically spent, and I knew that I just needed to sort of stop and have a bit of time just to reflect on everything. So yes, it was hard mentally and physically, but it was equally, you had to have your eyes on the bigger prize of where you were wanting to get. Don't focus so much on, oh, that bit wasn't very good. That's fine. In the grand scheme of things, the process of learning isn't linear, and you go backwards and forwards. So it didn't really bother me too much, as long as I was making progress overall.
You must be quite focused as well, just to be able to put those personal things to one side. Your husband struggling with a young child, and also, like, I suppose, being around 10 men as well, and actually trying to learn these new skills.
Yeah, it was. when you're snowboarding, it's probably like a lot of things. All you think about is you, the mountain, the board, everything else, because it takes up all your time and energy. You can't really think about anything else. You might think about things when you stop at lunch, but my husband goes away and snowboards, and I'd look after my daughter, so I didn't see why that couldn't be the same for me. And I was aware that there was that tug, but I would put that to one side. I thought, well, I would deal with that in the evenings when I'd have that conversation with him, and even now I'm quite good at compartmentalizing things and think, right, I'll deal with that at that time, and I'll deal with that at that time. And being away with the men do learn differently to women. So, the men tended to be quite focused on themselves and what they were doing. So there wasn't as much chatter between the group members as there would be when I've learned with groups of women. And they tend to be a little bit more focused on what they're doing. I have to say, I didn't, being away, I didn't feel disadvantaged. I wasn't made to feel different. It was a very supportive environment. And I wouldn't hesitate, certainly in a snowboarding environment, going away with a group of men.
So you weren't someone who, I suppose, got in your own head and told yourself a story about being like the only lady there?
I did. The first night I did a little bit. I was like, oh my God, how am I physically going to cope? I'd had quite a difficult time before I'd gone away because of my daughter getting up. So I was tired before I'd even, having a young child at home. I was tired before I even started. So I did think about that. But once I'd got into day one, then I realised it was fun. And a lot of the men had children as well. A lot of them, they weren't, teenage lads. A lot of them were my age or older, so they all understood that dynamic at home. So I didn't really find that an issue.
The other thing that strikes me is snowboarding, could you argue, is a young person's sport, because you end up on your backside quite a lot, don't you, and you need a lot of resilience. And I can see that being a metaphor for life as well.
Yeah, that's yeah, you do. If you snowboard, you will fall over. If you don't want to fall over, then don't strap on a snowboard. That's all part of learning. It's a bit like horse riding. At some point, you're going to fall. That is just the way it is. And in life, that's the same as well. We all fail from time to time, and that's just part of being human. And I think sometimes you need to embrace that. So thinking that through. So later, I had that week in Chamonix, which was great, but I did want to learn with women. I did think, well, actually, I'd like to see what it's like learning with women. And I rang the sort of people who ran McNab's snowboarding and asked about that. Do you run any women's groups? And she said, do you know what? No, we don't. And out of the 150 odd people we've had through this year, only 10 have been women. So I'd said, well, what about if I work with you? Could we put on something just for women? So she agreed, and that's what we did. So the following year, I went back to McNab Snowboarding, but on a women's only week. So, and interestingly, I found that week much harder than being with the men. And that's because the women that I was with were much younger than me. They were much better than me. So I compared myself to them all the time. I was always the slowest. I had the worst technique. And I got disappointed and cross with myself. I felt in many ways for that week that I was, in terms of the 4 C's of mental toughness, I felt I was in control of my life and I had commitment, but I was just surviving. I wasn't thriving with my snowboarding. So I struggled with my confidence, my ability to accept the risk, and I struggled to learn. I didn't have the skills then that I do now. And if I'd actually looked back and if I'd reflected on it, actually I would see how far I'd come. I was riding on slopes that last year I'd found really intimidating, and I didn't even give a second thought to this year. So I was riding powder, it was much steeper, but I didn't give myself any credit for that. I just sort of punished myself and was cross with myself and disappointed that I wasn't performing as well as I thought I should be, and as well as I thought I should be in comparison to these other women. But I was being pushed out of my comfort zone, but I was probably being pushed too far and too hard too quickly. So I couldn't really learn properly. Although those people were all younger than me, and yes, perhaps there was an element of fitness, but I think also none of them they'd all come away with a friend. So they'd already got somebody else with them, but none of them were mothers either. So they didn't understand some of the pull that I would have back home. So there was that real difference. And by the end of that week, I can remember that last day, which was always my hardest day. I can remember crying, throwing a complete tantrum and an anger fit in front of Neil because I couldn't do it and I couldn't understand what he was trying to teach me. And actually, at the end of that week, considered giving up snowboarding. I thought I was useless at it. I couldn't do it. I'd really considered that I was going to get rid of my snowboard and settle my gear. But the crucial turning point for me was that I met a woman instructor called Tammy Eston, who runs Mint Snowboarding in a resort called Morzine in France. And at the time, we had a flat in France, so we used to go to Morzine quite a bit. Now, I'd found out that Tammy had trained with Neil and alongside Keith, who was Neil's sort of right-hand man. So I knew she would teach in a similar ethos. And that's when everything changed for me. And I managed... in that very first lesson, I managed to understand what Neil had been trying to teach me. And it was just because, I'm not saying that Neil couldn't teach, he obviously could, but we connected in a different way. So I'd found somebody who could teach me using metaphors and connecting with me that I could relate to. And I developed a lot more confidence because I trusted in her ability to see in me what I couldn't see in myself. So she would believe in me when I didn't believe in me, and I could borrow that belief, and that really helped with my confidence. And that then helped me to thrive and not just survive. And I could get all that fantastic learning. And, you know, from coming from where I came from, I mean, now I can ride off piste, I can ride in the snow park, doing small rails and jumps. I've even trained to be an instructor. But meeting her was a crucial turning point in my journey of learning to snowboard. And having those people around you can make a huge, huge difference.
That's fantastic. There's two things that stand out to me there is the importance of the coach snowboarder or coach athlete relationship there, and the fact that she's sought to understand you as a person as well as a snowboarder. That seems to be an important factor. And then the other one, which again happens in life in general, especially these days with social media, it's so easy to compare yourself to other people and beat yourself up, put yourself down. So there's definitely something in there about celebrating your successes and even just making a note of your wins and your successes along the way.
I think there's an element of not thinking about your own journey and where you've come from. Focus on you, don't focus on other people. And I think that's where it's useful to have a coach or a mentor, whether it's in life or when you're learning a new sport or a new skill. It's somebody who can look at things objectively, that gets away from the emotion and can remind you, well, actually, don't you remember this is what you were doing a year ago, last week or whenever it is? And you go, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I've forgotten about that. Maybe I have come a bit further than I thought. So it's having those two things, because even having the skills I have now, you know, I still work with coaches, whether it's through business and certainly snowboarding. I've had people say to me, well, you can snowboard, why do you still have lessons? I'm going, well, it's not really a lesson. You know, would you say to a top tennis player, oh, well, you know, you don't need lessons anymore, you know? So it's that dynamic, and people don't always understand or get that.
Yeah, it's funny because I play a lot of golf, and when I look around, it's with youngsters who are trying to get better, it seems to be a given where they'll work alongside a coach. But then when you get to the club level as an amateur, some people can frown upon the fact that you're going to work alongside a coach, which is absolutely crazy because it fast tracks your way to success.
Absolutely. I would always, and I think it's easy. The other thing is, I think unless you have a coach, it's easy to get into bad habits. And it can be bad habits, physical bad habits when you learn, like with snowboarding. And I know what some of my bad habits are, and I need somebody to remind me, pull that leading shoulder over your front edge. And, but equally we get into habits of thought as well, where, you can, and that translates then into your performance.
And I suppose that's where the sports psychologist or the person who's the coach who's interested in mindset comes into it. I mean, I find in my work certainly that we've all got our strengths, we've all got our limitations, and yeah, it doesn't matter really what role you're in. You can always benefit by having somebody looking over your shoulder and giving you some support.
Absolutely.
So, another thing that stands out to me is I bet it can be quite fearsome snowboarding. And I noticed in your book you mention about embracing the devil on your shoulder. What do you mean by that?
For me, that's about recognizing the fear and acknowledging it, but you still need to listen to that devil on your shoulder saying, go on, do it, do it, do it. So it's about wanting to do something, but feeling afraid to do it. And snowboarding is a risk sport, and there is a real possibility of serious injury or death with some of the activities. So, but you need to examine that fear objectively and look at the level of risk. Because if you're going to go and snowboard off-piste, say in the backcountry, a long way away from the resort or the boundaries, maybe it's a bad weather day, you haven't got the right equipment, you've got no instructor or guide with you, then you're asking for trouble. Whereas if you're snowboarding on-piste, gentle blue piste, you've got protective equipment on, you might have an instructor with you, the chances are that things, are going to be a lot less risky doing the latter than the former. But it's also about what levels of skill you have and whether you've done things before. So it's actually when you're frightened about doing something and you're looking at what is the inherent risk, you might go, do I need to manage that risk or mitigate it? So an example of this, I was on a snowboarding camp with Tammy and Mint Snowboarding a good few years ago now. And we were going in mid-December. 7 days before we left, there was no snow on the piste at all. And I was thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen here? And in that 7 days, well, probably just before we went, there was masses and masses and masses of snow. Consequently, the weather was bad as well, really low visibility, snowing, massive high winds. But because there hadn't been much snow, there was hardly anybody around on the piste. And one of the days there, we'd been snowboarding in the morning just as a group of us, and then we were meeting Tammy and we were going to snowboard together in the afternoon. And we'd been in one valley and we had to cross over into the other valley on the chairlifts and back down to meet Tammy. Now, the weather started to deteriorate, and as we came up the chairlift, when we came off the top of the chairlift on the ridge, it's usually where there's 3 chairlifts meet there, and usually it's really, really busy. There was nobody but us, and it was so difficult. You were worried that the wind was going to catch your snowboard because it was that bad. And when we set off, we couldn't see anything, but I'd been that way many times before, so I knew in my mind's eye where I was. But because there's quite a long flat section, you have to get up a bit of speed, and if you don't get enough speed up, then you grind to a halt. And I didn't get enough speed up. Nearly everybody else had disappeared, and I was completely on my own on this sort of plateau, really, in this howling sort of maelstrom. I could just about make out one of the men had stopped because he realised I wasn't with the group, just to check. And I carried on down. We met Tammy and we decided, she took us to another chairlift. And as we snowboarded down, we noticed everybody was walking towards us, and they were said that it's now too dangerous to get on the chairlifts. They're closing the resort. So we had to basically take our boards off, walk back up. And Tammy said to the group of us, you've got 2 choices. You either go down in the lift or you come down this piste with me. Now, the piste was what we call the home run, which is a great piste, one of my favourite pistes. It's got a bit of everything. But across the front of the piste was some bright orange netting that said it was closed. And I'd said to Tammy, look, it's closed. She said, it's fine, you'll be with me, but you've got a choice. Now, from my point of view, I had to think about what was the risk here. Earlier on in the week, and I haven't got time to go into it now, but I'd had quite things hadn't gone well, and I'd been quite poorly and on my own on the piste. It was my own fault, nothing to do with Mint Snowboarding. And I had to decide, what do I do? So 2 of the women immediately said, I'm going down in the cable car. And in the end, it was me and one man who said, no, we'll come down with you. And I thought about it objectively. I thought, I'm with an instructor that I trust implicitly and other people. I'm actually descending the mountain into the valley. So I'm not as high as I was previously when we got off the chairlift and in the middle, with just us there. Help was not far away if I needed it. I knew the run, so I knew I could do it. And I thought part of the problem with this run was earlier on in the week, there hadn't been enough snow to cover the lower part. So I thought, if I have to hike out, Tammy had caveated it, we're going to do this run. I can't tell you how it's going to turn out, but it will be an adventure. We might have to take our boards out and we might have to hike with them on our backs, get out at the end. I knew I could do it if I had to. So I objectively looked at that and went, right, I'm going to do this run. And we strapped our boards on. The first bit of the run is quite narrow and the wind was horrendous. But as we turned and dropped, the wind, we must have changed direction, the wind dropped, and in front of us was this pristine powder piece that nobody had been down. And it was the best run of my life. It was fantastic. Now, I could have said, do you know what? This is a bit scary. I don't want to do it. And I was frightened. I was a bit frightened, might have been too strong. I was a bit nervous. Should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? If it had just been with a group of pals, I might not have done it. But because I was with Tammy, I knew I'd be safe. And towards the end, the snow was pretty sketchy. And she had said to us, follow exactly in my tracks because of the way the snow was falling, the topography. And I did see a skier who was going too fast, hit a depression and was launched out of his skis. I mean, he was being a bit of an idiot. But I knew I was safe with her. So that's what I mean, that sometimes you have to think about what is the real fear here, and is this something I can either manage and mitigate? Can I do something else, or is it really fear? Is it actually to do with me and my self-belief?
Yeah, and it sounds from what you're saying there, well, one part of mental toughness is being able to manage your emotions and control your emotions. It sounds like you didn't let your emotions get so high, so you weren't able to think objectively.
No, and I think, but that's developed over time. So going back to my previous sort of weeks that I'd had in Chamonix, I had let my emotions dictate things, and I hadn't had that opportunity to grow and think about the journey that I've had learning to snowboard that's helped develop some of these things. And even now, occasionally, although, I could get down practically any run in a resort now, it might not be very elegant, but I could do it. But some days we have good days and bad days. And there might be some days where I just think, do you know what? It's really icy. I don't have to do that. I don't want to do it. So I'm going to go and do something else that's more fun for me without beating myself up that I didn't do it.
I love that. So who would you say has been the biggest influence on your life?
Without a shadow of a doubt, it'd be my husband. He's not just with snowboarding, but he's opened up, and encouraged me to do things that I might not have done otherwise. I mean, some of the travels and things we've done, I might not have done. And certainly with snowboarding, he opened that chapter to my life that I would never have opened because I still had that hang up of, skiing was awful. So that learning to snowboard as an adult opened up this whole new world to me where, I learned new skills, I met interesting people and traveled to beautiful places. And all of those things inspired me to push beyond my comfort zone to pursue that passion. And by pursuing that passion, that, led me to start writing my own blog because I wanted to connect with other women that snowboarded and snowboarding mothers in particular, which then eventually led to me writing my book so that I could embrace all my passions of snowboarding, change, and then helping other people. So, he's been instrumental in many ways of opening that door to me.
That's fantastic, and a nice little story then.
Yeah.
Nice of you to share that. Whereabouts can the listeners connect with you and find you, and also where can you direct them with relation to your book?
So they can find me, my blog is mummysnowboarder.com. That's where you can find me on my blog. If you want to find out more about me and my book, that's on Take It All On Board, which is all one word, takeitallonboard.com. But they can also purchase my book from Amazon, either as a hard copy or as an ebook. I'm on Instagram as #mummysnowboarder, and I'm on Twitter as and it's MMY Snowboarder. So that's where they can find me.
Brilliant. I was going to say, I'll put all of those links in the show notes so anybody who listens to this episode can find you quite easily. I've loved chatting to you and hearing that story. Although we've known each other for a good few years now, I didn't know a lot about this, so that's fantastic.
I suppose it's like we don't always get that chance and that opportunity to sort of chat in depth about things because we're busy doing other stuff. So no, it's been really enjoyable. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Brilliant. Well, again, much appreciated, Kate.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed that conversation with Kate. She shared some fascinating stories. And it goes to show learning any new skill, especially one which is so difficult as snowboarding is, it takes patience. Lots of patience. In reality, today, people often seem to be in a rush, in a hurry. So there's lots of lessons that we can all learn from this episode. From the aspect of falling down, many times, and accepting that we are going to fall down. In life, in sport, in work. And I know in my work, I often see so many people fearful of failure. So I'd like you to question yourself. What actually is failure? And are you being realistic? Are you accepting that you actually might fall down on your backside a few times? And it's the getting up that's so important. And on that note, if you've enjoyed this podcast, you may well be interested in joining the Sports Psychology Hub. It's a Facebook group, one that's growing week by week that I've got set up. It's very supportive, where we share ideas, best practice, and help each other when we have difficulties. You'll find a link to this group in the show notes. Have a great week. I'd like to give a big thanks to today's sponsors, Functional Intelligent Training, who are a sports injury clinic located in Gosforth, near Newcastle upon Tyne, and specialise in athlete development, nurturing future champions, strength and conditioning support, and excellent rehabilitation services. Thank you for listening to Demystifying Mental Toughness today. To sign up for tips and advice to help you be the best that you can be, go to www.sport-excellence.co.uk and sign up to the Mental Edge newsletter.